So this question is addressed to Jetsunma. What is your understanding of being perfect today after all the years of learning? Goodness, kindness, and?
Yes, well, I always hope people won't ask that question. Well, now I suppose I conceive of perfection in the sense of coming back to our true innate nature, which is primordial pure awareness, which naturally encompasses both wisdom and compassion, which in the Hindu tradition is called the Paramatman, in Buddhism is called the Buddha nature, and in Christianity is called the Christ within. So I think all religions know that we are not what we identify ourselves as being, and that our clinging to this small sense of self is the very thing which obscures the reality of our true radiant being, which is our natural state. So our task is basically to come back to who we already have always been, but which we have not recognized for so many years. Like, you know, when the sky is full of clouds, and we identify with the clouds, and we don't realize that behind the clouds is this vast blue infinite sky. But without the sky, there would be no clouds. So, yeah, that's basically it.
This question is for Swami. It seems that the division and conflict in the world is the problem. How do you feel we can embody that powerful, destructive, feminine energy of the Devi without feeding into the divisions and conflicts?
Yay, you were listening. Can you hear me? Do I need this?
Yeah, I think it's better.
Okay. Yes. The way we embody it is by not externalizing the conflict, but by realizing that the conflict is here, within me. That is the battlefield. It's not out there. Once I've won this internal battle, then I know exactly what to do in the world. The Devi's fight is in here for her emergence. The Devi's fight is with my own ego, that little self that the Jetsunma was pointing us to. We cling to that, we totally identify with that. This kind of social construct that was given to us by our society, by our parents, by our education. We believe ourselves to be that little thing. And that is the demonic. That is what we're fighting. We cannot kill it. The ego can't fight itself. It's absurd. We can allow the Devi to emerge and take up the battle, or we can prevent her emergence and live in the ego. So it's not an external conflict that I'm talking about. It is an inner conflict. Exactly the same, this same story is repeated in Hinduism many times. The battlefield of the Bhagavad Gita is not about some battle that happened God knows how many years ago. It's the battle that's happening in my heart right now. And every day I say, just as Arjuna said to Krishna, we don't need to make this fight. But fighting isn't nice. Let's go home. And every day we have to allow Krishna's voice to come through and say, wherefore is this perilous strait come upon you? Stand up like a warrior and fight. That battle is within, and the battle is simply with ourselves in many ways, through fear, through hate, through anger, just through laziness. Laziness is my big demon. The other thing my dad used to call me is Mrs. Nero, because he said I was always lying on my side eating a book and reading a book and eating chocolate. So laziness is my big demon. Every day I have to fight that demon. down. So this battle is within. Can I allow the emergence of that divine? Then I know what to do in the world. Only then do I know what to do in the world.
All three of you are of a renunciate order. How important is celibacy on the path of self-realization? Self-realization. Yes. All three of you are of a renunciate order. How important is celibacy on the path of self-realization?
It's always one of the first questions.
I think it is you. Okay. For me, I look at celibacy as if it helping me to reach within, take it. That's what I look at it. And if it is helping me to serve the another human being more better, I take celibacy. But if I am convinced this celibacy is not helping me, I think now I have the courage to leave that. I am going to the path which will make me more comfortable. At present, celibacy is very meaningful for me. That's what I look at.
When I first came to the Buddha Dharma when I was 18, I realized that for myself this was the most important thing in all the world, and I didn't want to be distracted. And at that time it seemed to me that relationships and families and work would be a distraction from the path. That's why when I was 21 I became a nun. And I have to say that for myself personally, looking back, I'm very grateful, because never even for 1 second have I regretted that decision. I'm very glad that I understood for myself what was best for me. But what is best for one person doesn't mean it's best for everybody. And certainly in the Tibetan tradition, there are many of the very greatest lamas, even some of the teachers of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, are married. And they have families. And nobody thinks the less of them because they're married. I mean, many of their most devoted disciples are monks. And so personally, I don't think the question is not celibacy per se, but what are we doing with our mind? Wherein does our mind dwell? What thoughts are usually occupying our consciousness? And also what works well for us, because as Swamiji said, you know, the family life and motherhood and so forth are the means for us to learn so many qualities needed on the spiritual path, such as compassion and patience and loving kindness and generosity and many, many qualities which we need other beings and close relationships to develop. So celibacy, non-celibacy, that's a personal choice. But the important thing is to transform our everyday life into our spiritual practice. That's what really counts.
I would just echo what both teachers have said. As I said to you, I went through the period of sex, drugs and rock and roll. Then I got married, and now I'm a sannyasi. I think the question is really not celibacy or non-celibacy, it's how distracted does it make me? How much does it distract me? If 90% of my energy and attention is going into getting and maintaining a sexual partnership, it's going to leave me very little time for my spiritual path. So that is all, that is the question. I think it's finding that sacred balance. That is the trick. And so it's not celibacy or non-celibacy, it's how do I bring balance to my life.
How can men be helped not to feel threatened by the divine feminine?
I think Swamiji, you should definitely answer this one.
It's quite simple. They allow the divine feminine emergence in them. She is no less present in any man than she is in us. She is them. Let her be called forth.
Yes, I remember when I was in Lahore one time, and one monk asked me who my personal deity was, and it's a female. And he said, "Why are you practicing that? Men should practice the female. You should be practicing the male deities."
What is the thought or prayer that can sustain you when you see a great discrimination against women or men? How can you cope with hate and despise against men or other women in that case? It was addressed to you, Jetsunma.
It was addressed to me. I think this is more Sister Lucy's field. But anyway, in brief, the response to great injustice is, of course, great compassion. Compassion both for the perpetrator and for the victim. Compassion doesn't mean endorsement. It doesn't mean that you just allow it to go on because poor thing, they're so deluded, they don't know what they're doing. But it does mean that we respond to great injustice not by creating more injustice. To respond to anger with more anger just, perpetuates the circle. And so the more we see the injustices of the world, the more incredible compassion comes. Compassion because people do bad things because they themselves inside are fragmented and in pain. A person who is genuinely happy and balanced and at peace with themselves will not do anything to harm others. It's because we are motivated by our egos and our ignorance and our greed and our anger that we create so much imbalance and disturbance in this world. How sad. How sad when we have this incredible potential to be enlightened beings that we act like demons. So even the demons are worthy of compassion because they also have the divine spark. But that doesn't mean that you just sit back and think how sad. Of course, one acts, but one acts from a motivation of understanding and compassion and not retaliation.
Maybe one of the incident I will explain. There was a man whose wife was with us naturally because he was so violent, and she came to Maher, and after some time he found out that she was in Maher, and he was so angry with me. And then he came literally with an iron rod, and he said he wanted to finish me up because for supporting the woman, and he was abusing like anything. At that moment, there was certain kind of fear, but I feel some kind of a strength, what we call in India Shakti. Mm-hmm. Something came out from within me, and I went to that man. He was there with that iron rod, and I just put my hand around him. And I said, "What happened? Come inside, come. You come and have a cup of tea with me." And he looked at me so strange, because his eyes was red in anger. And then here I am with my hand around him, and he became so helpless. I don't know whether it is going to work in every case, but this particular case worked. And he put that iron rod, as if to hide that somewhere, and then he walked with me. And then, of course, we had a very good conversation, and I can say that was one of my best experience of showing compassion.
that is the emergence of the Devi. Shakti is the female form. That is the emergence. When we don't engage from the place that is our first immediate response, anger, hatred, revenge, when we don't engage from those, the Devi has emerged and is at battle with our responses. And the more we let her emerge, she does that.
To Jetsunma, how do I know if the bread is ready to be eaten? How do I realize if I'm ready to brighten others' lives?
This is dealing, of course, with the yogic training, and the name for the yogis are those who are realized. And what we need to realize is our innate enlightened nature, what in Buddhism is called the true nature of the mind. And my Lama said that when you have had a glimpse, a direct realization of the nature of the mind, in other words, when you've seen the clear blue sky beyond the clouds, then you can start to practice. Then you can start to meditate. That's not the end, that's just the beginning. You know, it's only when there are no more clouds and only blue sky, then you can say, okay, now we're stabilized, we're cooked. But for ordinary people like us, we don't have to completely wait until we're cooked all the way through, otherwise there would be no teachers. Our very teaching can be a way of cooking. You know, that is, as long as we don't claim we're enlightened. What frightens me is not that we have teachers who are not completely at one totally with the path, but that they think they are. Yes. And that they claim themselves to be. That I find very frightening. I have never yet met a Tibetan Lama who said, I am enlightened. They all say, even the highest, I'm just on the path like you. I'm also practicing. And as long as we realize that we've got a long way to go and we're still cooking, and that we're not fully baked. I mean, my fear would be if you thought you were fully baked. As long as you realize we're still in the process, then that's fine to share what we have already with others.
Yeah, I agree. The frightening thing is to encounter the teacher that says, you know, I'm fully enlightened. You can be sure. Just ask yourself, what is it that is saying that? Because at full enlightenment, there's nothing left to say that. So that is the fear. And I think, I have no confidence as a teacher. I don't want to be a teacher, never wanted to be a teacher, I still don't want to be a teacher. A lousy job, low pay. And even before coming to this conference, it was like, oh, I don't want to go, I don't want to go, reach this, oh, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. And my deity that I hold as my chosen form is Shiva. But when that divine self wants to communicate with me, always communicates with me for some reason as Krishna. And so the voice of Krishna said, so I'm there, I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. I haven't got anything to teach you. I want to stay down and study. Actually, I think I feel a cold coming on. Then I hear the voice of Krishna saying, yes, I know you know nothing, you're just the absolute dregs, but go out there and do it anyway. And so I think that's the most that we should ask from our teachers, that they are bringing their sadhana, their practice into our lives to help us with it. And it's the most we should ask from ourselves. Because as Jetsunma said, if we wait until we're enlightened, what are people going to do?
What is the unique role of the grandmothers as elders at this time, and how do we manifest it?
Grandmothers, I think you will be able to answer that.
Every grandmother here, go out there and kick ass. Not other people's, just your own. Get serious with your practice. That's the lesson for those of us who are grandmothers. You're on, this is the lesson, when you're a grandmother, you're on the home straight. Get serious with your practice.
I was at a conference of tribal grandmothers one time in upstate New York. And so they had invited women, Native Americans and Mexicans, Africa, Inuits, and various women who basically were not just grandmothers but also shamans, mostly, apart from the Tibetan who was the head of the Tibetan Women's Association. I don't think they understood what kind of conference it was. But she was a grandmother. But it was very interesting to meet these women, very strong women. And some of them had never been outside their village before. And each of them coming from a different tradition, some of them native traditions, some of them very strong Catholics, but all of them with a strong sense of tradition of the past generations, the 9 future generations. And it occurred to us that probably what was the problem in places like America and Australia, why people were so disassociated, was because when the immigrants came, they didn't bring their grandmothers. And they were starting afresh. So that long sense of responsibility to the past and responsibility for the future, the 9 generations in the future, that you have to be very careful how you use this planet, because it's got to go on, you've got to hand it on. And that is what is missing in our present culture. They don't even think of their children, what to speak of 9 generations on, which is why we're destroying our own home.
I have something to say to that. Yes. For me, it is in a very simple way what I understand as an Indian woman. You know, my mother is now great-grandmother, and she lives in a home, not in an aged home. So all my nephews, nieces, and we, of course, all of us have something to look upon, and that I call it love. You know, she shares that love with us, and all our nephews, nieces, they come for holidays and whenever they can, and she lives with that. So I feel so happy that there is something to share. She has so much to share with us. Okay. But what happens when I moved into the West and I saw all the aged people are in those aged homes, and I said, their wisdom and their love just getting rotten. Nobody knows them. You know, I feel so sad. This is what, as an Indian woman, I can understand your culture, okay, but as an Indian woman, what pains me is to go to those aged homes.
To Sister Lucy, how can I live a sacred life if I live in a place where we have war, hunger, violence, and pain? And the second part of the question is, where do you find the strength to keep the light in the darkness?
I can understand when you live in this kind of countries, what you must be going through, okay? But at the same time, if we become part of that war in our mind, then we are destroying ourselves. Can I still, in spite of all that is going on outside of us, can I still find that flame within? And can I share that flame to the people? I feel, I'm not a theologian again, So that is what is important for me, what I understand. When the whole world is in turmoil, can I still find that peace? I feel we can. If we are really in touch within ourselves. I know things are difficult. It's easy to preach from here. But when I am there, it is going to be difficult. But what I feel is still find that playing within us.
This is addressed to each of the teachers. What has been the greatest loss or sorrow in your lives? And how has your practice helped you to overcome and integrate this loss to further the good in the universe? And the second part, are all our losses as women providing us with the tools to truly be spiritual warriors?
Can you repeat that second part again?
Yes. Are all our losses as women providing us with the tools to truly be spiritual warriors?
For me, as a Catholic nun, I don't find myself as so much I lost. I don't find that. But yes, sometimes yes. Especially all the comforts the religious life had offered me. Okay? And all the good food that they were serving me. We had, as I had explained to you earlier, we had servants to do everything. Okay? And now here I am serving the people. I don't know. Of course, I have women to cook and give me food and everything is there still. But that's in a different style. Okay? It's not more they and we feeling. It's altogether a we feeling in my head. So I don't consider that as a great loss because I have found this great pearl that I was searching for. You know, that pearl that Jesus speaks about it in the gospel. You know, that man sold everything because he found the pearl there. It is something that way I feel. So, I cannot really answer that particular question. Maybe you all can answer them.
I think for me, undoubtedly, the greatest loss was when my guru died. And somehow, it came so unexpectedly. I just had thought he would be always there. And the shock of his death was incredibly overwhelming to me. And I think for a couple of years I was in a very dangerous place spiritually, because I could easily at that moment being overwhelmed and allowed myself to get distracted from the sheer pain of that loss. But I was saying to Vicky yesterday, that's another one of my little demons that the Devi has to battle with, is to realize that my pain and suffering is exactly the place where the Devi emerges. That I can't turn from it. I have to stay there and be with it to allow for that emergence.
Yes, likewise. Without doubt, the greatest pain of loss was when my Lama died. He was only 48 and none of us were expecting it. And when he died, I felt as though I was in a huge desert and my guide had just quit. And now where did I go? And I remember spending several hours on my bed just crying and crying and crying. I didn't know I could cry like that. And then a Dharma sister knocked on the door and said, "Look, come and sit with me, let's meditate." So I sat there and then I just looked at the pain in my heart. It felt like my whole heart had been torn out. And instead of resisting it, I just sat there and looked into it and all that pain. And then as I looked, somehow my mind went deeper and deeper into it. And from that arose this very deep conviction that, of course, the Guru is always with us. The Guru is in our heart. Where do we think the Guru is? And and it's not that I then ended up feeling cheerful, but I had this very strong conviction that, Rinpoche was always with me. It wasn't this clinging to the external physical form. So that was actually at the time a very powerful experience of seeing this silence behind the noise of all the pain, and this empty, warm love in the center of our being. I think that for people in general, we have the thing which is a big problem for us, and especially perhaps for women, is our attachment and our clinging. And so, how to deal skillfully with loss is a very important thing, that we don't just create more attachment. I remember, can I go on? When I was, as I say, when I was 20, I left for India. And before that, when I got the letter coming from India saying that I could go there to work, I remember running through the streets to meet my mother, who was coming from work. And my brother was he was in the Air Force and he was in Singapore, and I was the only one at home. My father died when I was young. And so I ran through the streets and I met my mother and I said, "Oh, I'm going to India." And she said, "Oh, yes, dear. And when are you leaving?" She didn't say, "Oh, what do you mean you're leaving me, your poor mother, all by myself? How am I going to survive without you? Your brother's already gone and now you're leaving me." She accepted the loss of her daughter, even though we were very close. And all the time that I was in India, every 10 years, she would write and say,